Estimating the product backlog using affinity estimation. Issues with estimating. In 1979, Kahneman and Tversky found that human judgment is generally optimistic due to overconfidence and insufficient consideration of distributional information about outcome. There is a human tendency for us to want to please others, and in so doing we bias our estimates optimistically in the name of pleasing our stakeholders. External forces, budget, customer deadlines, completion, etc., pressure us to complete things as quickly as possible and so adversely influence estimates. Often, there is an irrational demand for very precise estimates in the face of a lack of clarity about outcome required and the inevitable changes to both the need and in the world in which the estimated endeavor will occur. Comparative estimating. Comparative estimating, especially where it involves collaborative techniques, is designed to avoid some of the issues described. Rather than expressing effort in time-based units, comparative estimating requires us to express it as a multiple of that of a baseline item. Either a known, low-effort job, known because it has been done, or a well-understood, low-effort job, one for which the outcome is clear and unambiguous. The work needed to achieve the outcome is known and straightforward. The effort can be estimated with a high level of precision and confidence. Story points are used to emphasize the value of comparison over individual capability. E.g., any person comfortable running a marathon could acknowledge that the time for this would take a little over 2x that to run a half marathon. Precisely how long it would take a specific individual is irrelevant in the first instance. Uses a nonlinear scale, a Fibonacci-like sequence of points to deal with reduced precision associated with increasing size. Reduce low-value debate associated with unsustainable precision. E.g., estimating the time to make a cup of coffee to the nearest minute might have value, whereas estimating the time to grow the coffee beans to the nearest minute is pointless. Affinity estimating is sometimes called bucket estimating. As with planning poker, Fibonacci-like sequence is used to cluster items requiring similar effort. A low-effort, known/well-understood item is used as a baseline. Various techniques are used to allocate backlog items to buckets or columns of items, see photo, all involve discussion of stories where required to achieve consensus. Discussion is more limited than with planning poker. There are 3 variants of affinity estimating. Variant 1. The estimators swarm around the work surface and individually take stories from the backlog and, based on their opinion alone, place it in the column of the estimate they think it is closest to. Once the backlog has been exhausted, the estimators spend a small number of minutes moving cards around that, based on their opinion alone, have been incorrectly placed. The Scrum Master, who again acts as moderator, identifies any stories that seem to be moving around a lot, perhaps pulling them from the work surface or pinning them in place. These stories are then discussed collectively, with input from the product owner, to gain consensus on the final estimate. As with the planning poker technique, the higher of 2 entrenched opinions should normally be taken. Variant 2. The product owner reads the next story. Any estimator can ask a clarifying question and after hearing the answer indicates a column for the story to be placed in, asking for acceptance from the group. If there are no questions, any estimator may indicate a column. If there is disagreement, the story is discussed further, ideally prompted by a question from another estimator. This step is timeboxed to an agreed duration, e.g., 60 seconds. If disagreement remains, the story is put to one side and the process is repeated for the next story. After the remaining stories have been estimated, the stories that were put to one side are discussed until consensus is reached. As above, the higher of 2 entrenched opinions should normally be taken. Variant 3. In which estimators take it in turns to propose an estimate. An estimator reads the first story and proposes an estimate. If there is any dissent, the story is discussed until consensus is reached. The next estimator in turn reads the next story and proposes an estimate, and so on. Reflection: comparative estimating. Story points are used to emphasize the value of comparison over individual capability, e.g., any person comfortable running a marathon could acknowledge that the time for this would take a little over 2x that to run a half marathon. Precisely how long it would take a specific individual is irrelevant in the first instance. Uses a nonlinear scale, a Fibonacci-like sequence, of points to deal with reduced precision associated with increasing size. Reduce low-value debate associated with unsustainable precision, e.g., estimating the time to make a cup of coffee to the nearest minute might have value, whereas estimating the time to grow the coffee beans to the nearest minute is pointless. How much work in a sprint? Most Scrum practitioners estimate using story points also use the concept of velocity to forecast what they can get done in a sprint. Velocity is ideally based on past performance and refers to the number of story points associated with product backlog items done by the end of each sprint. Notes: remember, product backlog items are what are taken into a sprint and are the basis of sprint planning. During sprint planning, as tasks needed to get these items done are identified, it is likely that they will be estimated in days or hours. If velocity is used, then a story point estimate for product backlog items must be part of what it means for a story to be ready. Velocity remains valid indefinitely provided the work estimated for the upcoming sprint is estimated against the same baseline item, even if it is for a different product goal or even a different product. Commitment-based planning. Commitment-based planning is a technique that can be used to estimate how much work can be done in a sprint, even if the product backlog items have not been estimated. The velocity for a Scrum team where one has yet to be established. At the beginning of a sprint planning event, when selecting work to pull into the sprint, the Scrum Master can facilitate an activity where, in brief, the first product backlog item is selected and discussed to confirm understanding. The question is asked of the developers: if this was the only item to be done in the sprint, could we commit to delivering it? If the answer is yes, then the next backlog item is selected, and the question is asked: if we added this to our sprint, could we commit to delivering everything? The previous step is repeated until the answer to the question is no, at which point that item is returned to the product backlog and the rest are accepted into the sprint. If backlog items have previously been estimated with story points, then the sum of the points for the committed items equals the estimated velocity. Exercise: estimate the product backlog. Choose an item on the lower end of the scale and place it under 1 or 2. Continue to go for an item 2 or 3 times as large or 1/2 or 1/3, don't go too far up the scale too quickly. Take an item off the product backlog and place it under an estimate: 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 20, 40, 100. Go until items stop moving. If a card keeps moving a lot,